Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Training Well Done, your podcast on the what, the why, and the how of quality training. I'm your co-host, Coach Donald.
I'm Coach Tim.
And we are here on this episode to talk about aerobic power, VO2max, and velocity at VO2max. Two really fun concepts to think about, but when it gets to like the high level running world, these are things that like people love to jam about. And then when you get to the not overly serious college pro, really been running for a long time people, I don't want to like I don't really know how to say that, because like I don't even necessarily mean non-elite, but everybody else
Age group competitive.
age group competitive. We're talking about concepts that you might not be familiar with at all. So kind of like just opening up and thinking, do you know your VO2 max?
Not off the top of my head, actually, now that you say that. My VO2 max right now is probably high 50s.
That's it.
It's lower than you would think. I've been doing a lot of base mileage.
Okay. My Garmin says mine is, what does it say right now? My Garmin says my VO2 max is currently 52. At one point earlier this year, it was like 54. I think my Garmin's had it as high as 55 before,
Yeah.
but I think it's usually around like 53. When I was in college, we did stress tests. So at Slippery Rock, shout out to Slippery Rock. Hey, if you're a high school athlete and you think you might be interested in studying exercise science, I suggest you go to Slippery Rock if you think you're like, I want to study sports science. We have one of the best exercise science programs in the country. This podcast is not sponsored by Slippery Rock University. It's actually sponsored by my webinar, which you can go into the link below or go on our website, www.ghperformance.com/webinar, and get all about training and plyometrics and all that. Anyways, the shameless plug. This podcast is sponsored by Webinar, not Slippery Rock. But I love my alma mater, and I go up there every year, twice a year, to do Exercise Science Day. And shout out to Zach, who's going to be our new intern, who probably will have started by the time this episode got released. He's a Slippery Rock guy. Anyways, so we did Bruce protocol stress tests, which they use for like cardiovascular fitness, and sometimes they'll use in like exercise physiology labs for like people with actual heart issues. But there are ways that you can tell VO2 max. And I think in college, when I was running, I was a college sprinter. I was like 200 meter, 400 meter hurdle guy. I got a VO2 max like 56. Yeah. I never got over even close to 60.
I just looked at mine right now. Right now I'm 57. With a pulse ox of 97%.
It should never be lower than that.
No.
If your pulse ox is lower than 97%,
no.
You should go see somebody.
Typically 99. Yeah, so I have had it up over 60. But right now that's where we're at.
So it's funny, thinking about our topic today, velocity at VO2 max, because Coach Tim's VO2 max is not that much higher than mine. Matter of fact, earlier this year when you trained me for the Virginia Marathon, my VO2 max was probably around like 54, which 54, 57, not the same number, but pretty close. And yet Tim is light years faster than me because he can run at a much higher percent of his VO2 max than I can for way longer. So something to think about is kind of like really setting up what the episode's really about.
The tone,
in the first
right?
place.
Yep. That sets the tone for the whole thing. You mentioned, Coach, that it's probably important to define exactly like what VO2 max is in the first place, in case people are jumping into this episode and they haven't listened to other episodes where we've spoken about it. Basically, to keep it simple, VO2 max is a measurement of maximum oxygen uptake, right? So basically the amount of oxygen your body can take in and absorb.
Yes. If you look at the word itself, V is for volume, O2, think about chem class, oxygen, and then max is, max. So the volume of oxygen you can maximally uptake, as Coach mentioned. And vVO2max is the velocity you can run at your VO2. And so when can you tell us what speed we're usually at when we're running at our VO2 max?
What speed am I usually at?
Like, not so much speed, like what distance or how long can we run there, I should say.
Oh, so your VO2 max is what, like any effort probably under 60 minutes?
Way under that. More like 2 miles.
2
For
miles.
a lot of people, it's around 2 miles. Usually around like 10 to 12 minutes for a lot of people. Sometimes even like 9. So that's usually where we're going to find our VO2 max. So for a lot of you who are like high school or middle school runners, your 2 mile time is going to bring you at your vVO2 max. I should say that when you're running a 2 mile race, you're going to be at your VO2 max. And so then you can look at what that velocity is that you're going to be running during the segment of the 2 mile that you're at your VO2 max. Because you don't start the rep out at your VO2 max. You get to your VO2 max. And then you can run there. It might take you about 2, 3, 4 minutes to get to your VO2 max. And then you can hold it there for another 5 to 6 minutes. So that's something to think about when it comes to like running at VO2 max. Once you start getting into like that hour-long part, that's when you start getting right like a threshold. So most people peaked, tapered, rested can run at about their lactic threshold for 40 to 60 minutes. If you can run for longer than 60 minutes, it's a caveat though.
Yeah.
So for somebody who is easily capable of running for an hour, you can run at your lactic threshold for close to an hour. Somebody who's like really, really well fit, maybe a little longer.
Yeah. So I was thinking about a conversation that we had at an earlier podcast where it's mentioned something about like racing a 5K at or pretty darn close to VO2 max. So for a well-conditioned individual who's rested, tapered, and is running, an 18 to 20 minute 5K. By the time you get to VO2 max, you're already a few minutes into the race, so you could theoretically maintain that.
Yeah,
for the duration of that race, right?
Most people are running about 95% of their VO2 max for a 5K. Again, depending on how long it takes for them to do the 5K.
Yeah.
So if you're somebody who's running like, you mentioned like 18 to 20 minutes, you're going to be in that range. If you're somebody running like 13, 14 minutes, you're going to be running at a much higher percent of that VO2 max.
Yeah.
So, these are some fun things to think about with it. And so let me look at my little script thing here. So you want to know what's a good VO2 max. There's definitely bad and there's definitely elite. And then there's all that stuff in the middle where there's a lot of other context that makes it matter, right? If you have a VO2 max, I have literally a computer on my lap, so I could actually pull up exactly what's unhealthy VO2 max. I'm going to off the cuff say that it's below 40, but it's probably like more like below 35. So low levels of VO2 max. I need to type what is. I should have my book in front of me. So yeah, I was right. So it's about if you're a young man, under 40 is pretty bad. But in general, if you're not a young man, under 30 is kind of poor, below average, to where, what does that mean to have a poor VO2 max? That means that every time you take a breath in, not even a deep breath, just a breath in, your body does not do a good job of getting oxygen to your muscles. So when Coach Tim mentioned it's the volume of oxygen you can uptake, even just without the VO2 max part, just the VO2, the volume of oxygen you can uptake. But the maximum part, of course, is when you're working at your hardest. It's measured in milliliters per kilogram per minute.
Yep.
All right. And this like more of a it's also like weight adjusted. And so because it could also just be milliliters per minute if it's without relative, and it's just absolute. But we usually talk about relative VO2 because your body size matters. But if you're only taking in 30 milliliters of oxygen per minute per your body weight, that is not a good way. How do I say this in easier words? That means you're not getting enough oxygen to your muscles. And so as you improve your fitness, you're able to get your more oxygen per breath into your muscles. We think about our earlier episode about aerobic adaptations. There's all the capillaries that you get in your arms, legs, all the other organs, right? As you train, and then your heart gets stronger, which allows it to pump more blood, which helps your VO2 max go up. So what's a good VO2 max? What are some of the highest VO2 maxes of people that you've met or competed with, or that you've trained, or that you just kind of know?
Well, I don't know. I don't keep that. I don't really. We don't really talk about that actually during runs.
Yeah, that's like a random thing to talk about on Sunday. That's probably
Right.
almost douchey activity. People like, yeah, bro, what's your VO2 max?
I just imagine.
I just met you.
Right. I just pictured like an Instagram reel about like dating a distance runner. Like that's their icebreaker question is like, what's your VO2 max?
There's a non-zero chance I brought up VO2 max on me and Leslie's first date, which was a 12-mile run.
At least you have the context. You're on a run. You're talking about it there. I don't know. Like if we're talking Olympic level athletes, I don't know off the top of my head what a average VO2 max would be. I know. At least most of the people, in my circles probably are in the high 50s, low 60s.
Okay. Yeah. So going to that question about what's really, really good or not, elite runners are in the high 60s and they're in the 70s. Highest ever recorded VO2 max. Now, these are Google searches. I don't know who the person is, so we're going to go with, oh my gosh, Norwegian cyclist Oscar Svensson tested at 97.5.
That's crazy. I
insanity.
I thought that it was in the 90s. I would have guessed 92, 93, and I wouldn't have been able to tell you who.
Yeah.
That is an interesting factoid, but I remember seeing that at a certain point. 97 though. Wow.
Most elite runners are in like the 70s still. Yeah. If you're like a college runner and you're pretty good, you're probably in the 70s. And then most of the people that you know that are like, wow, you can run a mile or 5 miles or 10 miles really fast in a way that's like, whoa, they're fast and age competitive. They're probably in the upper 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
And most of us who are like fit and healthy, active people are probably in the upper 40s, mid-low 50s. It kind of depends on your sport, right? If you're like, oh, I just like to hoop and I like go to the gym, but you like do this stuff 5-6 days a week, you're probably in upper 40s, maybe around 50. If you do run, cycle, or swim a lot, you're not necessarily age group competitive, but you do it frequently, you're probably in the 50s.
And so the average ranges that we're talking about here don't surprise me. What does surprise me
that's not average. Most of those people I just named are not average. Average is probably like in the low 40s.
Sorry. Average for our population. I'm surprised that the low threshold was as low as it was, though.
Yeah, I wonder how far it goes before you're like,
I don't know
on like a ventilator or something.
Wow. And there's a genetic component to it.
Oh,
too,
yes.
Right?
Funny about the genetic component. So, what did it say in the book? This is why I should have like research notes right in front of me. So, your genes account for somewhere between a third and a half of like what your VO2 max baseline is going to be and where your ceiling can get to. And then environment and training are going to influence the rest. It's not cleanly a third and a third and a third, and it also is going to depend on the person, but your genes will influence how high your VO2 max can be. If you won the genetic lottery, like you don't get a 97 milliliter per kilogram per minute VO2 max because you were born to like people who can't walk a mile, right? You won the genetic lottery, and it takes a lot of training to still expound upon that. You think about all these runners in like Ethiopia and Kenya who do these distance running. There's also environment.
Uh-huh.
So then there's what's your like living situation like in regards to either how you commute or just how the running culture is where you're from that also will contribute to that. And then there's a training, of course, like how much are you training to actually improve your VO2 max?
Well, and then those all of those three things though like are big components, but they're not mutually exclusive either, right? Like I won't be able to name the study, but they've looked into like multi-generational. You bring up like the Kenyans and the Ethiopians, so there's multiple generations that have been born in that environment, right? Trained at a high level and like checked those boxes, and then they have the genetic component on top of it too. So like it's just like it's like compound interest in that particular sense. It's not oh hey, I live at altitude and I train hard. It's the past 3 generations of my family have been born and lived at altitude and all have trained hard and then passed that along as well.
Oh yeah.
So I guess in summary, guys, what we're trying to say is that don't get hyper fixated on what your individual VO2 max is, because it's going to be different for like what good, quote unquote, good is different for everyone. It's all about how you express it, and that's sort of what we're going to talk about in this episode.
And when it comes to racing, your velocity at VO2 max is the far more important feature. You could have, one person could have a 66 VO2 max, another person could have a 69. But if the person has a 66 has a better conditioning to run at that VO2 max for longer or run close to it, they're going to have better race performance outcomes most of the time. Think about our episode about running economy. That's going to play a big role into how well somebody runs. My VO2 max is not much less than Coach Tim's, but his running economy for these longer distances is so much better than mine that he can actually run at a higher percent of that. Lactic threshold is going to matter a lot. How well can you actually buffer lactate? How much can you tolerate the acidity buildup so that you can keep running? How well can your body reuptake the lactate to be able to produce more energy? How well do you actually utilize energy in the first place? These things are going to matter a lot that will influence whether you having a high VO2 max is going to be a big boost or something that is lost potential.
Yeah, and the inverse applies too. Like you said, it's like if we were to go out to the track right now and do a 2 mile VO2 max run, you'd smoke me.
So something you could think about where what can you do to measure your velocity at VO2 max? Something you can look at is a 6-minute all-out run test. This is something I want to try. I have not done this myself, nor have I had an athlete do this. So this was something that I actually learned in like reading up for the podcast itself. And what it is a fitness assessment where you run or walk. For most of us, we're going to be running the maximum possible distance you can do in 6 minutes. You're often already warmed up, and so then you can basically do some simple math and record how far did you go in 6 minutes, and then you can record that speed. So you should already be warmed up, though, and you should be trying to run at a very consistent pace. Not like you're bolting out really hard the first 30 seconds and you pooped out the last 1 minute, but you're warmed up, your heart rate's up, and you go out and you try to hold as fast of a steady pace as you can for that duration.
Okay, that makes sense because I was going to ask you about that because in my mind, like the distance runner that I am, in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, 6 minutes of an all-out effort is pretty long. So how would I approach this? I'd probably take like 2.5, 3 minutes and like push, but not push, and then like 2 or 3 minutes, and then just go
Mm-hmm.
like just gobble up as much ground as he can. But that would defeat the purpose.
So when we look at some common myths, right? We kind of talked through some of these in regards to having a higher VO2 max, guaranteeing better race results, or it's the single best metric to track. Um, I did not even look at the show notes, but we breezed right through all three of those myths. So let's go into our deep dive and kind of talk through some more of this. So, Coach, you want to talk to us about the actual capacity you have and like what those things are. We kind of talked about as far as what makes up that VO2 max, and then what does it also mean as far as like usable speed. But like, what are those things that build up our VO2 max?
Um, See our aerobic base building episode, right? Um, Definitely go back and check that out. That's going to be uh, a really beneficial way to increase your VO2 max. Varied running as well. We spoke about it on the last episode, not in this particular context, but like making sure you're mixing up your runs, running at higher intensities, not frequently, but often, and I mean, basically just making sure that you're fit, right? And by fitness, I mean not you're getting the buffet. So when it comes to running, you're doing your LSD runs, you're doing your tempo runs, you're doing your interval workout, and you're getting the appropriate dosage of all of those. Um, and well, we'll talk about this. Building, you could do this simultaneously, but in for a lot of our population, what will most likely happen is someone will um, build their build is the wrong word. They will increase their VO2 max as much as possible, and then diminishing returns, limiting factors, like we mentioned, they're gonna hit their, let's call it quote unquote, peak VO2 max, and they're not going to see the performance results that they would anticipate at that VO2 max.
Mm-hmm.
At which point, then we need to shift the focus, maybe away from training VO2 max, because you're not going to lose it overnight, right? And then start focusing on the vVO2 max.
Oh yeah. And so when you think about um, how what changes with some of that, right? With cardiac output, kind of the actual ability for your lungs to breathe well, right? The strength of those, how well it vents and diffuses. At a certain point when you do all this base building, you kind of get those, to some extent, those stats kind of get really close to maxed out, right? And then we look at that velocity part. So you talked about like the varied running, and so part of what makes up that velocity at VO2 max, then if you think about, okay, varied running and being able to change those gears and have that efficiency, well, how, like, when you think about when you've trained for your races, or even like when you're at trackside, how you work on improving, like, how much oxygen do they have to use per unit of speed? Um, how do you frame that for people to understand when it comes to improving that velocity, right? One of our kids, kind of his context to that question was talking about like he did a critical velocity workout over the
Uh-huh.
weekend. Critical velocity, something that I'm actually not as in vogue with, but it's generally this pace in between like your VO2 max, your lactic threshold. It's more like a 30-minute ish pace, and when you look at this oxygen cost per that unit of speed, though, how do you frame kids to understand why they should be hitting different paces, or understanding, or even sometimes this might be more true with the adults, the value of the speed workout so that they can do that? I think this question has evolved because I think this is more geared towards maybe our adult listeners and understanding why they should do that. And, how do you talk to them about why they should be doing this type of work? so they can be more efficient. Think about our miles per gallon conversation from before.
If I'm understanding your question correctly, Coach, you're curious to know, like, in an in-person session, how I'm guiding an adult athlete through, like, what would be considered a vVO2max type of session.
Yes. So, not so much just the session, guiding them through the session, but guiding them through understanding why they need to be doing that session in the first place.
Okay. That makes sense. So we'll talk, I mean, about a lot of the stuff that we just mentioned, right? Is that it's, well, this is a good parallel to what we said way back when. It's like, it doesn't matter how strong you are or how much, like, weight you can lift. It's the application of that strength for your certain discipline, right? Same thing with VO2 max. Doesn't matter how high your VO2 max is, if the if the pace that if your vVO2 max pace is less than your goal race pace, right? So we established that frame of reference, is that these are two different things, okay? And a lot of times with the adult population, at least, just introducing the concept of vVO2 max, it's like, wait, what?
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of have to spend time saying, oh, well, this is the application of that capacity, right? And then in terms of, like, guiding them through a session, I really, it just depends on who I'm speaking with, but I really like the phrase comfortably uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we need you to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's the point. But I don't need you to be so uncomfortable that you feel like you're just going to completely crash and burn. So comfortably uncomfortable is what I've been using, and it seems to resonate with people,
Okay.
and seems to get them to that point, that threshold that we need, in order to develop that speed.
And I guess if you're like new to doing that, that builds up over time, because if you're new to running comfortably uncomfortable, what that is probably a lot lower of your threshold, which you might
Correct.
be able to do more, but you don't know it. And there's probably some actual physiological part of that where, right, because you actually haven't accessed and tried that, you're probably actually less capable anyways. And then as you keep doing it, you have more range, and that grows in what's comfortably uncomfortable.
Yeah, and then there's more nuance too, right? Because, like, for a novice athlete, comfortably uncomfortable could mean, oh, this is the pace or the output level that I race at.
Mm-hmm.
And then for a more experienced athlete, then obviously you're like, okay, well, there's comfortably uncomfortable for a 5K, there's comfortably uncomfortable for a 10K,
Yeah.
there's comfortably uncomfortable for a half, and they all mean different things based on the context. That sort of comes, from experience. From a coaching standpoint, if we're in a closed sort of environment, like, I'm either running next to an athlete, biking next to an athlete, maybe on, like, a longer tempo run, or if we're doing some stuff at the track, I'll tell them, I'm like, I'm listening to your breathing, and I'm going to give you a poke and a prod if we need to go just a little bit more. And I'll rein you back in if we're going a little too fast. So, yeah.
Okay. So some of the other things we think about what velocity of VO2 max looks like, it's that aspect of also how efficient can you be when you are running fast. I think sometimes we keep saying the same thing, but I want to also say it slightly differently so it hits a little differently. Sometimes you just need to hear it differently. So when you're running at this, like, again, VO2 max is a very fast pace. It's comfortably uncomfortable. You're not sprinting an all-out 400, which is uncomfortably uncomfortable. Or like an
Uncomfortably
800 where, like, you're running an 800 and you're like,
impossibly uncomfortable.
am I going to survive this? Will I live? Is a question that might come through your mind on the last, when you get to meter 600. But this is still uncomfortable, right? You're running really fast, and how well can you maintain your breathing, your form through that fatigue? Um, when we look at some of the things that higher level athletes might show, people who have these really high vVO2 maxes, right? They're coming back to some of the same things I love to talk about. Mitochondria, right?
I
They have
thought you might like this.
wonderful mitochondrial density. What is mitochondrial density? Wow, like I'm just gonna walk. I should get a T-shirt that says, I not for me because I don't have this, but for other people, maybe you should sell this as a GHP shirt. High mitochondrial density, or like it should just be like mitochondrial density, but like maybe some sort of icon that means high. Um, if this were California, I would put like a smoking thing there, but it's not, and I'm not gonna do that because it's child friendly. But like a cloud or like just an arrow, about mitochondrial density, and then you can walk around being like with regular people. They have no idea what that is.
Yeah,
They're gonna just breeze right over. But they're like,
Yeah.
oh, mitochondria, because like the powerhouse of the cell from science class. But then like it's like the ultimate running nerd shirt. I gotta really think about this.
So that's where my mind went to. It's like that the front should be a graphic, some sort of like, cool, funky design mitochondria graphic. And then on the back, you could put across the shoulders just powerhouse.
Okay, I like where you're going with this. So you could
Right.
put powerhouse in the back, but you could put mitochondria. Um, Maybe you draw like a big picture of a mitochondria and then put like the formula for density, which I do not know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And then you can put the formula for density like inside of it,
Right.
and then
right.
like somebody who's really nerdy is gonna look at your shirt like mitochondrial density,
It's like a if you know sort of
Yeah.
thing. It's not spelled out.
and then they're gonna look and see your Garmin or like whatever kind of random running giveaways you have that you like take this way
Oh.
too seriously.
Maybe powerhouse should be on the sleeve.
Powerhouse on the sleeve. That could be like a running club. That's like a
the
racing jersey.
mitochondrial powerhouse.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Racing
That would be a
team.
cool racing team.
That would actually be really neat. All right, so maybe we'll get singlets instead of t-shirts.
Yes, it's singlets, but
Might-
we gotta get the arm sleeve below the elbow,
Yeah.
like the basketball players do.
Yeah.
Okay, we're on to something.
All
here.
right.
So
we'll look into it, listeners.
we'll let y'all know.
We'll let you know.
Yo, that'll be. All right, let me come back to that later. So, really good vVO2max is demonstrated by having really good mitochondrial density, which goes into training at metabolically challenging paces. So that is doing VO2max training is one of them, right? What does that mean to do VO2max training? Often that is 3 to 5 minute runs. I'm big Jack Daniels VDOT guy, and I've used that as the training guide for like our winter trackside program for our youth athletes, even our summer trackside, like just our youth distance trackside period, for the last few years, and like kind of had a bigger deep dive with it this year. And so these are a lot of runs at 3 to 5 minutes where you're getting into that VO2 max. You can also do it with shorter runs. It might be the runs that are like 1 to 2 minutes, but you have to do a lot more frequency, and it takes you a few reps to actually get there because you need the fatigue to build up and the speed to be there. Where these type of intervals, and there's other things you can do, tempo runs, threshold runs, that are going to help build up your body's ability to eat oxygen. Right? You breathe in. We talked about what VO2 max is.
I like this visual. Yes.
Take in the oxygen.
Yes.
And a stronger heart pushes all that blood to your muscles. And then all those mitochondria eat your blood. Not eat your blood. Sorry, they're not vampires. They eat your oxygen, right? And they take all that oxygen, they mix it with these electrons and all the carbs and all that whole process from the Krebs cycle. And then voila, you have all this energy. And so people with really high mitochondrial densities, for every breath they take, they can produce so much more oxygen than everybody else, hence having a high VO2 max. But along with having that mitochondrial density, they can produce more ATP, for that, which means that not only just because they have more mitochondria, obviously, but their body is able to better handle glycogen. They're able to break it down more. They're able to utilize more of the sugar in in their bodies to make that energy, because you have to mix the sugar with the oxygen in a great concoction that looks like the Powder Puff Girls kind of thing, sugar and spice and everything nice, and then you have to mix the whole swirl, right? You have all that going on in those cells. And then you also have something where you are not relying on like explosive muscle fibers. You're not using your type 2 fibers as much. You're not using these ATP PCR systems nearly as much. So you're able to be more efficient with that and running economy, right? So these are some of the things that you can see metabolically with one of these athletes who has a really high vVO2 max.
It's like we talk about ad nauseum on the show, right? It's like in order to be better at a thing, you just need to do more of the thing. And in order to develop vVO2 max, you need to train at vVO2 max, but you've got to lay the groundwork first, right?
Yeah.
You have to develop that overall, like I said, quote unquote fitness. You have to have the running efficiency and economy that we talked about to effectively, maybe effectively is the wrong word, in order to optimize these types of sessions in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I say all that to say this is like we do want to be careful, not to jump the gun. And even though we are placing a high emphasis on vVO2 max and what it means as it translates into performance, you want to make sure you have your base set first so you get the most out of this. The other thing that I thought of while you were saying that, Coach, was I think that on our shirts, because I really loved that visual of like eating the oxygen. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people. Maybe that's what we put on the sleeves, is just like get hungry.
Pac-Mans with O2 symbols.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And good runners have more Pac-Mans.
And more O2s, right?
That would be a cool thing.
That's
football teams, they put like little things on their helmets as they hit achievements. You could have like a race singlet or a jersey or something where like you got more Pac-Mans as you like improved either like with PRs or like winning things or PRs,
some sort of like award-based
showing
system,
up, being consistent, whatever. And you can get like little Pac-Mans
eating with like the O2s.
Yeah. We're on to something.
All right. If anybody has a good graphic designer out there, let us know.
Something else to think about when it comes to this is, one of the points about vVO2 max that's important is this fractional utilization, because there's also going to be races if you're running a half marathon, if you're running a 10K, if you're running obviously a marathon, where you are going to be running below your VO2 max. But at 90% of your VO2 max or 85% of your VO2 max or 95%, how well can you run? If you're, whether or not you have a really high VO2 max, if you're able to run consistently fast at a high percentage of that VO2 max, those races are going to get better. So we think about running this marathon where that percentage might be, just below 90%. Being able to actually run at, let's say, 88% of your VO2 max for 3 hours is going to help you out really, really well. You might have a 63, a measurement of 63 for your VO2 max, but that doesn't mean that you can run at 88% for longer than an hour or two. And so being able to actually maintain that speed over time is something that you really want to be able to do this type of training so that you can get out of it. Being able to be more resistant to fatigue at any given percentage below that VO2 max is going to help you out. Being able to not accumulate so much fatigue, which part of that fatigue accumulation is how well are you actually using up your carbs? How well does your body not oscillate in different ways that spend more energy? and your actual mental and emotional abilities to stay focused on your form. Sometimes we get distracted, especially if it's fast and it's a little bit painful. Do you have the mental tolerance to actually stay in that position? Because once you start letting the voices get to you, then you start acting different ways in your form, which is going to cause more waste of energy and use of it, or it's going to have more voices talking to you.
Yeah, and that's where the training bit comes in, right? Like you having a high VO2 max and being able to run a 6-minute mile is not the same as being able to run a 6-minute mile for a 10K race, right? Like you can have all the pieces of the puzzle, but that's why training for your whatever goal it is, or whatever distance, whatever pace. That's why we do this stuff. That's why we do things like mixed long runs where you're doing, high threshold work in the middle of a 20-mile run. That's why guys were at the track doing doing repeats.
So one of those things that you'll notice, I remember this in the last episode. We were talking about like fluidity and what does it feel like when you have this? When your VO2 max and especially your velocity at VO2 max is being well developed, there's a level of fitness you feel at high speeds that you didn't feel before. So let's take I'll take the old Patrick actually I was talking to at the track the other day. And he was talking about, I'm out of shape. He was doing his workout. I was like 20? No, was it? It was more than 20. I think it was like, how many 400s was he doing? It was more than 20. No, it was 20. I think it was around 20. I feel like it was more than that. Anyways, he was talking about, I have to keep my heart rate like under 165 and like, I feel like so out of shape. And there's a sharpness that, when you're not in shape that you don't have. And so, he could go out and probably run 407 in a mile, or he does way longer. So he might go out and run, 1410 and 1430 in like a 5K. I forget what his PR is. But how hard did it feel to do that?
Right.
When you are in really good fitness, you don't feel like you worked as hard when you run that fast. Even if you are running a personal best attempt, it doesn't feel like you had to put your whole life on the line completely. I mean, sometimes it might, but versus if you can run even close to that time, but you don't have that same fitness, you feel like you basically had to sell your soul to even get that speed because it just hurt that bad. And so there's a feeling when you're going through hard workouts where it doesn't feel like that hard workout is costing you so much of yourself to get it done well versus when, previously.
And there's even a lot of nuance on the one end of the spectrum when you are fit too, right? And this was kind of the point that I wanted to make when I was talking about like the training is like you and this does come with experience and knowing where that line or where that threshold is, but it's based on your training, like you might be able to hold a 6-minute pace for a half marathon, and the guy you're pacing with starts to push a little bit and you drop to 5:56. This is a very personal example if you couldn't tell. The guy you're pacing with drops to 5:56 halfway through the race. That can be enough to say, like that's too much. That 4 seconds on the back half of this race for me is a crash and burn effort, right? I could hang on, but eventually I would start to drop way back. Or I say, hey, go ahead. That's where you're at. 6 minutes is my happy place, and that's the limit of my threshold because that's what my training dictated. And so it can be so nuanced like that. I mean, we're talking about the difference of a couple seconds per mile, like 2-3 seconds per mile over the course of, a long distance event. One is comfortably uncomfortable. The other one is uncomfortably uncomfortable to the point where it's going to negatively detract from the overall performance.
And you two could have the same VO2
And
max.
we could, exactly.
But he's
Thank you
able
for
to
bringing
run
that
at a
full
higher
circle.
speed
Correct. Yes.
at that VO2
Correct.
max. So,
yes.
if you both were running at, like, hey, you got a 58 VO2 max, but he's able to run 4 seconds per mile faster. I mean, over the course of a race, he's not leaving you by a mile, but he's substantially in front of you, unless you have some amazing kick.
Yeah. No, that is,
And
they have run a much stronger race at that point, and probably got in, 2 or 3 more solid workouts during that training block.
Yeah. And, that's one of the things that you can tell when somebody has a lot of aerobic power, which aerobic power is another word or phrase you can use to describe VO2 max, or having a high VO2 max, or even that type of training, is aerobic power, right? Because this is very fast still, and it's a demonstration of how powerful your aerobic system is. And they're able to finish races really well. You're able to feel strong through the finish line, even with a maximal or near maximal effort. You didn't run through the line and just completely collapse.
Right.
You find, we're new to running
Right.
marathon, right? My very first marathon and my second. Running through the finish line the first time was like, I was quite literally in tears and couldn't walk, couldn't stand, couldn't hold myself up. It was just horrible, and I finished so badly. And the second time, I still finished. It was still pretty rough the last couple miles, but I shaved off 20 minutes, and I felt a lot stronger through the finish line. I was very, very weak, and I could imagine, okay, as I get in shape, I'm probably not going to do another one for at least another year. I'm in my whole speed phase right now, but as I get back to doing that, thinking, okay, how do I make sure that my fitness is really high for the pace that I'll be running at, so that I can finish more or less with dignity?
Right.
Can you run through the finish line and walk it off?
Right. And while you can structure your training around that too, I would argue that some of that does just come with experience too. Like knowing what those paces are and what those thresholds are like, and knowing what it feels like to maintain it. So you're not selling yourself short and leaving time on the table, but you're also not putting yourself in a compromised position where you're just collapsing at the finish line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a big, part of our episode here on velocity at VO2 max. So we talked about what VO2 max is. So that's the velocity of oxygen you can uptake at that's your maximal volume. I said velocity, goodness. Your maximal volume of oxygen you can uptake. And that's measured in milliliters per kilogram per minute. So it's but there's also measurements at absolute VO2 max that is just milliliters per minute. And when it comes to training and performance, it's usually made to be relativistic, so that it's something that it doesn't matter about how much you weigh. And so there's calculations for that. We're not going to get into that. All right, we talked about what some of these myths. So just having a higher VO2 max does not guarantee that you're going to run better than somebody else. It's not the single best metric to measure. You need to measure lactic threshold. You need to measure your actual speed and running economy. And like we talked about the other part of this episode, the velocity that you can run at your VO2 max. And it's not a lab number. It's not purely just tied to your genes, right? You can test this in a lab. It's one of the best ways to test it. You can use a face mask. We had electrodes, but I don't think the electrodes were necessary. There's face masks and ventilation protocols to do that with. And you can also measure that and get a decent number with a variety of different tests online. I talked about the 6-minute test for the velocity at VO2 max, but for pure VO2 max, there's other ways to measure it. Your little fancy smartwatch for running can get a rough estimate of where you're at too.
Very, very rough.
We talked also about what they represent in regards to the type of fitness that you have, in regards to the mitochondrial density. Shout out to our shirts that we'll make one day. The aspect of how velocity at VO2 max is demonstrated by how efficiently you use oxygen at any given speed. And so the cost of oxygen per speed, how well you can maintain your form under strain and under this aerobic speed that you're going to be at. And how this VO2 max, a lot of those limitations and what builds it are going to relate to your cardiac output, your stroke volume, your heart rate, and stroke volume. Make your cardiac output, blood volume, plasma. We don't really talk about all that. How well your body can actually get the blood filled with oxygen, because surprise, surprise, not everybody's body's great at actually taking the air you breathe and putting it in the blood. So not only do we need to be good at getting the blood pumped throughout the body, we need to be good at getting the oxygen into the blood and getting the CO2 out of the blood in the lungs, and then being able to get the oxygen into the muscles and getting the CO2 and all the other stuff out of the muscles. And so as you train more, your body gets better at all that, and that will help build that VO2 max. There's also aspects as far as your metabolism, muscle fiber. So I talked about building that mitochondrial density. We talked about being able to have really good use of ATP, which generally means you're not going a bunch of fast twitch things and using a lot of the more anaerobic aspects of training. Those are much less intensive when it comes to this type of training and running. And the important part of how fast can you run, not only just at your VO2 max, but as this relates to your training loads when it comes to doing your intervals or your thresholds, or when it comes to running these 10Ks, half marathons, ultras, or triathlons, is how fast can you run at any other percentage of your VO2 max, and how long can you do that for?
Yeah, so I think that was an awesome recap, and I was a little hesitant going into this episode. I wanted to make sure that what we were talking about was palatable, and I think we did a good job of breaking it down. I'm wondering, Coach, in our last minute or two here, can we touch on the seasonality component of like vVO2max training and when someone would want to start emphasizing it? At what point during their training cycle do they want to start emphasizing it? Because I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but we didn't specifically just like come right out and say it.
Gotcha. So you're going to start getting more into this depends on what distance you're training for, how long is your training cycle, how fit are you,
running,
right? What's your experience like? Right. So there's a lot of, it depends. I'll use this context right now. So for our distance runners at the gym, we are starting to emphasize this more now as we go into January. And so a lot of them, the vast majority of them, just got done with cross-country season. And so as we're walking into the off-season for winter, getting ready for indoor and for spring track, we spent a lot of time in December working on running economy. So we had them do a lot of volume of running, and increasingly more so. And we've discovered some kids can handle a lot more volume than other kids, and had to change that up because it's a different style of training than I usually do. And now as we go into January, our focus shifts to this VO2 max training. So we'll be doing a lot more intervals, especially for our 1,600 and 3,200 meter kids, and being able to string together much longer efforts as we go through that. So that's something we chose to do as this kind of phase 2 of their 3 phases for the winter training.
That's what I was trying to pull
our
out.
next phase, we're going to be looking at doing more threshold training and getting into that lactic work and the stuff that really is uncomfortable and hurts. As I explained to them, the goal was to spend the first phase of this throughout December working on their running economy and how smoothly they can run. So spending a lot of time working on how their form is and working on their cadence, their bounce, their arms, and just feeling good running fast at much faster speeds than they were doing during cross-country season. And then for this portion, as we go into the new year, how fast and how powerful can you be. So we're going to push that VO2 max so we can get that ceiling up as far as how fast you can now run. So we're going to take all that good form. We're going to put a lot of longer speed onto it.
Right.
And then when we go into our third phase for February, the goal is to be able to run well and fast while you're tired. And so then take all of that, of what they built, into being able to spend a lot of that time under duress and fatigue. But they should be able to lean on the aerobic power that they've built, as well as the improved form and bounce and running economy that they built from the 2 months before that.
Yeah. So by staging it in that 3-phase model, you're making sure they're moving well, right? And then they're expressing that and developing fitness at the same time, and then figuring out how to like really apply that in a race specific setting when everything like when you really just don't want to, right?
Yeah.
Just like anything else here, you can't jump right into that third phase and think, oh well, if I just want to develop my vVO2max, let me just go run 2400s.
Mm-hmm. A lot of them had really.
That's an experienced athlete doing a high level workout. So.
Oh yeah, that 2400 is outrageous. That's 5 miles of just 400s.
Yeah,
not including warm up and cooling down.
I'm sick enough in the head that I would like that though.
That's wild.
But I would chunk it. I would do like blocks of 4. Right, like
I don't know if he did 20 straight or if he blocked them. I feel like he did 20 straight though. Because it was like
be surprised.
Super. It was kind of like, as far as he was concerned, it was like a base level, kind of like that whole running economy thing where he's starting to get back into running fast after cross country, in that kind of base work. So he probably did 20 straight.
Wow.
But that's
special case.
That's
Kid's
the way we
really
looked at that.
Athlete. One of the things that I really liked on the notes here too, I think just kind of brings it all together too, and just to hammer home the point is, your VO2max defines what your potential is. Your vVO2max is going to define your ultimate performance.
I love that. I really think that's a good way to end this, and thinking about where those two things fit.
Yeah.
So our next episode, we're going to be talking about lactic threshold training, and so understanding what lactate is, what threshold training is, what this whole acidity is, aka when you're running and your legs burn a lot, right? That is what that is going to be about. So please stay tuned for that episode. Please like this episode if you can like it on YouTube or Spotify, whatever platform you listen to this on. Like the podcast,
like, heart, whatever.
Leave us a 5-star rating if you love it. Please share this with a teammate, a running partner, a swimming partner, a training partner, and support our podcast by getting our webinar. So it's strength training for runners. It's a webinar about plyometrics, about strength training as a way to help improve your durability for running, your economy, so that you can get the most out of your training. And there's videos that show you how to create workouts and how to do the exercises. So thanks for joining us on this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one.
See you next time.